So today, I've prepared the 5 most common and expensive mistakes when buying property in the Czech Republic. So let's start. Wrong type of the reservation contract. The first mistake usually happens right at the beginning. Let me warn, it's a bit rare. Agents stopped using this, but I've still seen it from time to time. So you find your dream apartment, and in the excitement of the moment, you want to secure the property as quickly as possible. So the real estate agent puts a reservation contract in front of you, and you might sign it without a second thought, thinking the agent speaks English, he seems nice, he must be my friend, but he's not your friend, he's a salesperson. I understand this is a bit ridiculous. You wouldn't sign the reservation contract on the spot without checking it with a lawyer. The mistake which I'm mentioning here, there are 2 types of reservation contract, and one of them is essentially useless for you. The first type is a 2-party agreement signed only between you and the real estate agency, which means the most important person, the seller, is completely missing from the equation. If you sign this, you have no guarantee that the owner will actually sell it to you because they haven't promised anything legally. The seller can change their mind, sell it to the neighbor, or decide not to sell at all. And you have absolutely no legal recourse because your contract is just with the agency, not the owner. Agencies sometimes do it. In the past it was more common, but these days you're looking for definitely 3 parties reservation contract. Oh, and one thing to make sure it's in the contract, it's a penalty for the seller if they back out from the deal, because you will have a penalty if you cancel the reservation contract. You will probably lose your reservation deposit. What if the owner decides not to sell it to you? So this is the thing we definitely add into the reservation contract to make sure it's binding for both parties. Not verifying the actual square meters. The second mistake is a classic case of what I call creative mathematics regarding the size of the apartment. You might see an advertisement for a beautiful 80 square meter flat, but after you move in, you realize your furniture doesn't fit because you're actually living in a 70 square meters. This happens because some agents love to include the area of the balcony and the cellar or the area of the walls into the total square footage. But let's be honest, you cannot sleep on the balcony in December. And this is crucial to understand from the very beginning. In a market where a square meter costs over 100,000 Czech crowns, a discrepancy of just 5 meters loses 500,000 Czech crowns, which is a very expensive mistake to make just because you trusted an ad. You need to distinguish between floor area, which includes the space under the walls, and usable area, which is the space you can actually walk on. The only way to be 100% sure is not to trust the brochure of the agency, but to go to land registry and request a document called prohlášení vlastníka, owner's declaration, or get it from the agency. It costs 20 crowns per page and it tells you legally binding size of the unit, saving you fortune for overpaying. And if you involve a mortgage advisor, it is one of the documents we request for the valuation purposes. Missing land or co-ownership. This leads us to the third mistake, and perhaps the most insidious, because you might not realize it has happened until years later when you try to sell the property. You might assume that when you bought the apartment, you automatically bought everything associated with it, like a land under the building, the courtyard, or a share of the commercial space on the ground floor. In your home country, it might be obvious. In the Czech Republic, not so much. It usually is alright for flats, but especially if you buy a family house, the land, its dimensions and liabilities are key information to check with your lawyer. Oh, and what about the garage on the land, which does not seem to exist on the land registry or on the paper? Classic. Pay attention to it, because the bank will have a big problem with any misalignments. If these separate items are not explicitly listed in your purchase contract, they remain the property of the seller, which leads to absurd situations where you own the flat or the house, but the original owner still owns some other areas. There has been an update in the law, so this is quite limited these days, and it can be maybe fixed later, but definitely pay attention if you're buying a family house to the dimensions of all the lands. And for example, also what I've seen before is when the fence was few meters from where it was supposed to be, there was a garden, and when the valuer came to the place, they got a bit suspicious, and then they remeasured the plot of the land, and they were like, hold on, the neighbor is taking like 2 meters from your property. And it was like historical discrepancy because ages ago, the owners agreed that they would move the fence a little bit more, but the bank again had a problem with this. Understanding the renovations, my favorite. Renovations, the final boss of purchase battle. This topic brings memories because personally I was involved in dozens of renovations in Prague, and I am still in Ostrava. And if there is one thing I learned the hard way, the renovation is always late and costs more. It's like a universal law. For our Ostrava investment, we managed to get a great contractor who is 90% on time and never charges more than quoted in the beginning. But in Prague, and especially if you are dealing with Czech builders not acting like a company like we are, it's a different story entirely. Sometimes you buy a property which needs renovations. This is normal. So if there are renovations planned, make sure you get ideally English-speaking contractor with personal recommendations, and always have a contract signed for the scope of work, get a detailed budget and deadline with penalties if they do not finish in time, same as clear payment terms. For example, in Ostrava we pay 40% upfront and 60% upon delivery. Oh, and be very specific about the quality of material. Ideally, what we do, we share with the builder a link to Hornbach, where we share this is exactly the floor which we want, this is exactly the color of the paint we want, these are the sockets which we want, to avoid any miscommunication later. Not clear communication about equipment and appliances in the flat. Very often when you view the flat, there is no talks at all of what stays in the apartment, but there should be. It should be one of the main questions you're asking, but even better, you put it to the contract. Ideally, you want to make sure to specify what stays in the apartment. Kitchen should be obvious, but let's better make it into the contract, same as any other equipment or furniture which you are promised to stay in the apartment. Equally, if you want the flat empty, specify it in the contract. Don't expect that the owner will paint the flat before they hand it over to you. I've seen it a few times. It's a nice gesture from the previous owners, but it's very rare. Don't expect anything like this. The message here is, if you were promised for something to stay in the apartment, make sure you put it into the reservation contract and then later into the purchase contract. These 5 mistakes might seem like a small detail, but I have seen them cost people hundreds of thousands, if not million crowns, and months of stress. The good news is that avoiding them usually is much easier and cheaper than planning for the worst case scenario. My name is Robin, I'm founder of Expats Finance, and for any mortgage and real estate related inquiries and guidance in the Czech Republic, don't hesitate to get in touch and don't forget to subscribe.